Jason Moore, welcome to the OP.
Yeah, hey, Sean. I'm excited to be here. I just think I like how we just dove straight in. I'm excited to do so.
Yeah, not like where are you in the world? What'd you have for breakfast? This is just, we're just diving in.
Let's do it.
So I just used Spren, admittedly, this morning and did an underwear selfie that scanned my body. And then I turned to the side and it scanned my body again and told me exactly, I'm sure there's a margin of error there, but told me what my BMI is, what my body fat percentage is. And to be honest with you, I have never done this. I've never done an InBody. I've never done a DEXA. It wasn't since I was a kid at the pediatric clinic where they used those calipers to pinch my bitch tits because I was a chubby kid and pinch my
Close,
love
right?
handles. Right. So I think, and again, like I'm fully caffeinated and super excited to talk to you because I think that this technology should be a part of everybody's biohacking equipment to get an understanding of where you are, what your physique is, how much body fat you have. So, why did you create this and who is this for? And maybe tell people what Sprint is before I keep going.
Yeah, sure. I mean, basically, so we've been, I don't know if you're familiar with the brand Elite HRV, but also that was us originally. Just kind of weaving the stories together. Basically, we've been in the business for over a decade, helping people basically unlock insights from the body. And I didn't know anything about, biohacking or optimization or anything like that. I had my own personal health journey and my own kind of performance journey that I was on. But all I knew was that there was answers that were probably in my body, and if I could build the right technologies, we could get those answers out. And I didn't want them to just be for me, because I have a lot to learn from other people too. So can we put these tools out into the world? And we've been successful doing that on a bunch of different markers. So from things like heart rate and heart rate variability and respiration rate to now body composition and metabolic markers. So body fat percentage, muscle distribution of fat and muscle around the body, basal metabolic rate, stuff like that. Through that journey, we went from creating our own hardware at one point, medical grade sensors that we created a handful of years ago, to more recently making it all available just via the camera of your phone. That's kind of been one of the big unlocks that we get a lot of excitement around now because basically everyone has a phone, and if you can turn your phone into like a tool that can estimate and measure these different features of the body comparable to the gold standard, it really opens a lot of doors for people to optimize a lot.
It totally does. And I think that everybody who, regardless whether you're an athlete or you're, the non-athlete, I think everybody thinks that their body fat percentage is lower than it is. Everybody's walking around like, I'm probably like, 17 or 18, and realistically, they're probably 25 or, 28. And so I think that number one, as accurate as it can be, just using the camera, which, the tutorial is really helpful. This is how you stand. This is how you light it. This is how we can see and scan, scan your body in your underwear. I think that just knowing that number, understanding that it might be, a percentage higher or maybe a percentage lower than what it is. And I do have a question about that. But just knowing like what your body fat percentage is sort of a wake up call. Is sort of like, oh, here I am. All right. And I was actually a little surprised to see my score because I thought that I was a little bit higher. And maybe that's my own, again, baggage from being a chubby kid. But let's go back again because obviously I'm caffeinated and excited. Go back to the Elite HRV story and how did that company start and how it iterated from that to now be offering Spren.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah. So, I mean, basically, so over 10 years ago, I was working in the energy industry, developing preventive maintenance software where we would go out into the oil field and track all this data to optimize the performance of equipment. in the field, and it was complex. I learned a bunch of stuff from that, but nights and weekends I was a personal trainer because I was really troubleshooting my own health journey. I kind of really got involved with the ancestral health community, the functional medicine and integrative medicine community, and then started down this path of like biohacking and optimization and things on myself, and then also with my personal training clients and friends and family and stuff. So that's kind of how I kind of shifted into the industry at first. But then I was like, why don't we have all these sensors and tools that I was using in my day job for the most important piece of equipment, which is our body? And so it was kind of this collision of my background in software and tech, and then having the opportunity to work in that through the industry and energy industry, and then bridging it into my passion, which was human health and performance optimization. And so that was kind of the genesis. And basically what I saw back then was that there was this really cool marker called heart rate variability, that there was a lot of promising research about how valuable it was to monitor, but there weren't really tools back then to monitor HRV. It's not like today. There wasn't like a Whoop or an Oura Ring or, things like that you could just get. And so I set out to create a tool that I could use. And it turns out a lot of people were looking for that because other people were seeing the research on heart rate variability too. And that kind of snowballed quickly. Like very quickly, I was flying around talking to like the national rugby team of England to help them understand how to use HRV to optimize their sport performance, and flying to hospital on the West Coast to help them understand the impact of trauma with children on the nervous system. So HRV just ends up being this really interesting marker that is like it's a very holistic single marker. They call it the check engine light kind of marker. And that just kind of opened the doors. We were in the right place at the right time to build a company, expand the vision, expand beyond HRV, start tracking more things, raise capital, attract a lot of partners. And then it evolved into Spren, which was kind of more of like just an expansion of the same vision, basically. Elite HRV is a great product that we're really proud of, but it had a pretty narrow focus and scope. So we wanted to kind of reach more people with more tech and more innovation, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that obviously for my audience, they understand what HRV is and the implications that HRV has on health and longevity. But I think that for Spren, it's a much wider net because everybody wants to know how much fat they have on their body. I mean,
Yep.
everybody is curious, how fat am I? Like, and again, I think everybody thinks they're a little less fat than they are, myself included. But I just think that this is such a useful tool, and using software instead of hardware. And the alternatives, to my understanding, are DEXA and InBody. And I don't want to crap on their program. I'm sure that's I assume that's industry standard for sort of in-person scanning and stuff like that.
They're great. They're great tools, honestly.
Right. But I don't need to go spend $500 to do it. I don't need to know that much. I can tell when I'm leaner and when I'm heavier, but to have software that can do it, that can take a picture of you in your undies and then tell you the information, is phenomenal. So maybe walk people through, and again, because I just did it this morning, and not like anybody cares, but my scores were so I'm 5'11", I'm 42 years old. I keep losing track. And my body fat percentage was 14.6. And I was a little surprised by that because I do a lot of different biohacking things. I do 5-day dry fasts with no food and no water to, hack stem cells and so forth. But I was assuming that I was probably, maybe 16 or higher. So I was actually really delighted by the 14.6. My fat mass is 27.5 pounds. My lean mass is 160. My BMI is 26. I'm now just opening my kimono and telling everybody my health stats here. The one marker that I thought was interesting, and I have this totally new to me, is this Android-Gynoid ratio. I'm super interested to have you tell myself and the listeners what, because I'm just above the healthy side. I'm a 1.16 Android gynoid ratio. What the hell does that mean?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a pretty technical term. We always try to bridge basically like what would a lab or scientists label something with what is understandable to people and just more practical, right? So in this case, you could translate that to like a very high correlation between like hip to waist ratio, for example, or understanding what percentage of your fat is accumulating around your midsection versus in kind of your lower extremities, right? And so you can also look at things, there's like appendicular, versus sort of trunk ratios and things, which basically means like how much fat or muscle are you carrying in your arms and legs versus in your trunk. And so there's all these different ratios that you can measure. Some people even like to measure like neck to hip to waist or shoulders to waist and all these different things, right? Basically what we found though is that for optimal health, one of the most important body composition metrics is visceral adipose tissue, which is VAT, VAT. That is the kind of measure of the percentage and amount of fat around your organs in your midsection. And since we can't see through you, like we're not an X-ray, right? So the closest approximation to that is Android-Gynoid ratio. And so that's why we really focused on trying to provide that. And you also get that in something like a DEXA scan. If you go get a DEXA done, you can see that in your report. I'm pointing over my shoulder because I have like my PDF printouts from past DEXA scans over here. In any case, so yeah, is the midsection in your trunk. Like you don't want to accumulate a lot of fat around that section relative to the rest of your body. Subcutaneous fat is actually the fat that's kind of under your skin and you can see it a little bit better with your eyes. And that can be distributed in different ways based on like hormonal patterns, body types, but also just general levels of body fat percentage and stuff. Subcutaneous fat is, we're learning, and this is kind of newer stuff, is that it's not that big of a deal actually to have fat in your body, stored in your body from a health perspective. It can be from a aesthetics perspective. You don't want as much fat usually around the body, and from a performance perspective. But from a health perspective, it doesn't matter too much if you have a little bit of extra fat, as long as it is evenly distributed and just kind of that subcutaneous fat. What you really don't want though is that like a beer belly or like a lot of accumulation of fat around the abdomen. It's a major red flag for pretty much every health outcome. And so that Android-Gynoid ratio helps people kind of understand that. Now there are some, considerations, like for example, if somebody is a competitive strongman or something like that, and they have just these massive trunks that, are incredibly strong, but also tend to have like some extra fat around them as well. And so we would want to, if we were going into that level of specifics, we would want to kind of go into a lab and tease that out still today. Like we wouldn't be the right tool for that specific use case. But for like 99% of the rest of people, that's what we're kind of trying to get at with that Android-Gynoid ratio.
Fascinating, dude. Fascinating. Yeah, I did ask in the intake, in the sort of onboarding process in the app, it's like, are you an athlete? I don't remember how exactly you worded it, but it was like, are you an athlete? And I am, so I don't know if that, I don't know what sort of, well, maybe you can tell me. What are the implications? Because like if I wasn't an athlete and I looked the way that I did and my physique was the way that it was, would that change the number at all?
No, just in very subtle ways. It's just basically so athletes tend to have like a higher muscle density. And so they tend to, you can look similar on the outside, but actually be denser and have like, accumulated a lot. Muscle density is kind of the like layaway of just describing the difference between an athlete and a non-athlete with regard to body composition. But that just kind of helps us calibrate and categorize people. What we find is that in the data, we just see there's an inflection point between people who are kind of casually training versus people who are training pretty hardcore or consistently.
Right, right. Well, if you think about like, well, an athlete can look Well, a lot of ways. You can look like Rich Roll, or you can look like an offensive lineman,
Right.
and you're both fit, you're both strong,
Yes.
you're both really high level athletes, but your body couldn't look different. One burning question that I have is, can you hack this by sucking in or flexing or trying to fake it like with the photography?
So yes is the short answer. If people find, by the way, if people like to experiment with that and they want to email us the results, that would help us to correct for that and detect that. But we're kind of going into a collaborative contract with each other by saying, hey, we're bringing this thing out of the lab where instead of paying hundreds of dollars for a scan, you can now do it from your phone. We have to work together a little bit on that, and we try to make it as easy as possible, right? But in this, we've learned this in the HRV days as well, right? So you can hack your HRV just by changing your breathing pattern. And so if you're wanting to detect like how much stress I have in my body and you're using or recovery status, etc., using HRV, you can hack that by just altering your breathing pattern, which sometimes you do want to do because you're intentionally using biofeedback or something like that. But if you're trying to just capture a baseline measurement and understand the state of your body, that hack is just,
Yeah.
it's throwing off your results, right? So similarly here, we recommend like you don't have to worry too much about like whether you're specifically inhaling or exhaling during your body scan. A lot of people actually just hold their breath during their body scan because it only takes like a few seconds. But you don't have to do that either. The main thing is like you're saying is like flexing all of your muscles and puffing up versus
Yeah.
just being relaxed and in a casual position. We recommend just relaxing and not sucking in or specifically sticking out and holding a posture that's repeatable for you to get the best results over time.
Yeah, I kind of assumed as much, I could I could puff out my stomach and slunch my shoulders together and look, look worse. And then the opposite is true. I could suck in and flex and hold my breath. And I did that, in the middle. I just sort of was like, this is what I walk around at, like my core is kind of engaged but not flexed. My posture is kind of what it normally is. I sit so much though that my posture is getting worse and worse. I'm
Feel
sure
that?
you, dude. You feel like, yeah, see the same thing. Where else do I want to go with this?
I'll volunteer one that you didn't mention yet, which is lean mass index. Fat-free mass index is what it's often called in the research, but a lot of people found it more intuitive when we called it lean mass index in our app. This is a score that basically a lot of people, like for men, will go anywhere from 16 to 25 on that lean mass index, fat-free mass index. And essentially what this is looking at is the amount of lean mass relative to your height, and that's what makes it an index. And so for people who are kind of in like the average man will be kind of in the range of 16 to 19, somewhere in there. Hopefully a little bit closer to that 19. When you start getting into more muscular athletic builds, then you start getting into the low 20s. So like 20 to 23 is really starting to get like a good amount of muscle on the body. And that's something that, again, relative to your height, is a really strong indicator for a lot of things: performance, longevity, metabolic health, glucose regulation, hormone regulation, all of that stuff. Often tracks very closely with this fat-free mass index or lean mass index. I did a little math in the background, and I think that yours, if you don't mind my sharing it out
Oh,
there,
please.
looks like it's sort of probably around 22-ish.
It's 22.3.
Okay, 22.3, nice, yeah, which is great. That's great. Actually, I'm working towards where you are. Hopefully, I'll get there.
Are
I
you a hard gainer? Is it tough for you to put
Yes.
on muscle?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I can stay very lean pretty easily. I tend to float around like 13-ish% body fat, which, by the way, in my own personal journey, because I stay small relatively easily, in clothing, people for my whole life have just looked at me and been like, that guy's healthy. But 2 years ago, which isn't that long ago, I was on this health journey for a long time already. 2 years ago, I had already crept up to like 23% body fat, basically. Same, actually weighed less than I do now, but was at 23% body fat. And I started tracking body composition just more regularly, first doing DEXA scans and then using our technology. And I really didn't make that big of changes. It was just really kind of dialing in a few things like being consistent with my strength training, even though I was a coach and a personal trainer and I had a lot of background in it. My own personal consistency over time was intermittent.
Sure.
And, and then protein was another one,
Yeah.
and calories. And so I'm not a person that typically like obsesses about calories, partially because I don't gain weight very easily. I tend to have a really high what's called non-exercise activity thermogenesis NEAT. And so if I eat more, I just burn more essentially, and I turn into a heater. My wife is like, "You're gonna heat up this whole bedroom in here from that giant meal we just ate." In any case, so dialing in a couple of things, I have been able to lose a tremendous amount of body fat percentage while gaining a lot of lean mass. And my fat-free mass index is now just breaking 20, which I'm proud of.
The question that I have too is, I know enough about, Ayurveda to know that there are three body types, right? There's endomorph, domorph, and mesomorph. Based on what you've said, you're an endomorph. You're a hard gainer.
Ecto, I think.
Are you ecto? Oh, ecto is leaner. I thought.
Yeah, if I, unless I'm throwing egg on my own face here.
I think. I
Yeah,
think. I think ecto. I'm pretty sure ecto. Well, somebody's gonna be like, "You idiots." I'm pretty sure ecto is thicker, bigger boned, hard to stay lean. Endo is leaner by nature, leaner bone structure, and meso is in the middle. But
hold on, I got it. I looked it up because I
yeah,
was like, let's do it right, right?
yeah,
Ecto is thin, lower
ecto.
body fat, difficulty gaining weight. Meso tends to be kind of athletic, muscular, and endo tends to be like rounder, gains weight.
This is rich roll is an ecto, and offensive linemen are endo.
Right, right.
Right. So yeah. So I mean, I guess it's just sort of off the cuff, but that is gonna play. That's gonna play a part in this, right? Like you could be, even, but then again, if you're an offensive lineman, or if you're an offensive lineman and you're walking around at 340 pounds, you're super strong. You may have a higher body fat percentage, but it's going to give you that actual data the same way it's going to give you the actual data if it's Jason Moore doing it, where it's a different body type and body structure. It doesn't necessarily mean you're a worse or better athlete. It's just how what you're walking around with.
Yep. Yeah. And like, so I think there's like some, scientific, like the community has gotten a little more nuanced and specific than those body types now. So like they're useful for practical reasons to kind of just be like, yeah, I'm like a hard gainer type, right? Like I have to really work to gain weight and muscle. But to me, that then allows me to make practical decisions like how much I eat versus how much I train and stuff like that, right? Sorry for the background
Yeah, dude,
noise.
where are you?
I'm just along the route, so usually there's an emergency somewhere in Asheville, North Carolina, where I live. Only when I'm recording podcasts. So sorry to the community for being on a podcast.
Yeah.
But in any case, what I have found and what we've looked at in the data, and I think what the community is at large kind of understanding, is that your body type is kind of providing, generally a starting point, but it's not as sort of set in stone as people thought once upon a time. Really, what that is it's kind of telling you how hard or easy is it going to be to change certain things about your body, and then what are kind of your ceilings and your floors, right?
Aha.
And so, like for me, so that offensive lineman that you talked about, like sometimes they will have a fat-free mass index, again, or a lean mass index of something like 24, just without even trying. They basically, and that's like put that in perspective. There's a lot of controversy and debate about this, but natural bodybuilders versus enhanced bodybuilders, it is believed that natural bodybuilders have a ceiling of about 25 on their fat-free mass index.
Really interesting.
Yeah, so you can be
That's as good as it gets.
is yeah, so imagine in your head like somebody, the most muscular, lean, jacked person that you can imagine, but hasn't done enhancing drugs. And that is probably around 25 on that fat-free mass index. But again, a football player who's competitive and just an athlete could just be walking around at like 24 without even trying.
Right.
And they're just got so much muscle and are so strong. That wouldn't be me. I wouldn't naturally, accidentally fall into that range. But through a lot of work, I could get close to that. But I would have to consciously try to gain weight in the process because again, I lose weight easily, which isn't some people who are listening, because it's not a very common problem to be able
Yeah,
to
no,
like,
you bastard.
they're like, damn you. And also like, I'm not necessarily complaining because from a longevity perspective, being lighter is somewhat of an advantage from a longevity perspective. But again, coming back to my like story is that when I was up in that like 23, 24% body fat range, but I was only 150 pounds at 5'10", it's like borderline sarcopenic obese, which is kind of this
Skinny
term
fat.
for skinny fat. Yeah. And so I was like relatively small, but very under muscled and was developing more unhealthy fat patterns like around my midsection and things like that. So that was a good wake up call for me by having the data and then just using like literally the protocols that we just put out to the world, using the same exact ones on myself, was able to get down to 13% body fat and actually gain 10 pounds of weight at the same time. So it was a very successful body recomposition that was about 2 years long and had some ups and downs, and like, nothing is ever linear.
Yeah.
But it was cool. It was fun to just apply the same principles to myself and see it work, that I've worked with my clients on in the past when I was a trainer, and then also that we've been putting out to the world as Spren.
Fascinating, dude. The cool part about this, well, the thing that I'm interested in is like I'm not a personal trainer. I've always sort of eaten. I've never counted macros. I just don't like the idea of weighing my food or counting calories. And I'm active enough, jujitsu and runs and stuff that I don't really want to think about the food that I eat. So now we're gonna kind of transition into the sort of the nutrition, the personalized nutrition plan, because it's interesting and it accounts for the kind of way you prefer to eat, which is really cool. So I know, or at least I've interviewed Sean Baker and Paul Saladino and the carnivore guys and understand, and Dr. Gabrielle Lyon talking about optimal protein is a gram of protein per pound of desired body weight per day. So I would be 187 grams of protein a day, which is really, I mean, frankly, it's hard to do without like protein shakes and stuff like that, but we know how important it is. But what this was really interesting is that this takes into account like your sleep, what your goals are. Are you trying to get more fit? Are you trying to lose weight? Are you trying to gain muscle, etc.? And this gave the protein goal calculation 172 grams, which is obviously below the 187 grams of my actual body weight. But then it asked the question around, well, are you plant-based, which would just make things so much more challenging? Do you prefer to eat lower carb? And so I plugged that in and it gave me the average daily targets for a fat loss goal, because I am trimming for a jiu-jitsu competition in next month. So I need to drop down. I need to weigh in at 181. I'm walking around at 187. It's not that hard of a gap to get to in 3 weeks. But the targets it gave me was 172 grams of protein, 104 grams of carbs, and 104 grams of fat, because I wanted to go lower carb. And as I was doing the little scanner thing, I'm like, no, I'm going to go way low carb. Not, I've done the keto thing. I've done the carnivore thing. I want to go way lower carb. And it's like, for as active as you are, Sean, for as much exercise as you're getting, you probably want more carbs to fuel your workouts, which is true. Because when I'm doing carnivore or when I'm doing keto, I get tired pretty dang easy. And a sweet potato feels like, a power pellet that just gives me tons of energy. So it associated for that and gave me this excellent plan, which is 172 grams of protein, 104 grams of carbs, and 104 grams of fat. I like higher fat, higher protein. So what I guess the question that I have that's kind of built into this is obviously your background as a personal trainer, deals with meal planning and so forth. What sort of journals or scientific studies or sort of, general knowledge are you pulling in to give these suggestions that I've gotten and that people?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, so we have a lot of nutrition expertise in the team beyond just me, obviously. And so even in our advisors, we have doctors in our advisory board and things like that. So we're pulling from a lot of different people's expertise within our team and advisors, but also we do look deeply into the research. And another thing that we're trying to keep in mind is like kind of how to package this in a way that, works scalably, right? So one of the things on the protein, well, there's too many different papers to cite them all off the top of my head, but if you go click through, we often provide citations on things. And then on our website, we're also compiling more of that research so that people can review it. And obviously we review it and get people to review it already, but like what I mean is like any user can click through and find out more about that. So, and what we try to do too is, yeah, again, accommodate for different preferences and sort of balance practicality versus, optimal, because and let you kind of tweak things within that range,
Yeah.
right? And so on the protein front, as an example, I agree with the people that you mentioned, like Dr. Gabrielle Lyon and others who talk about 1 gram per pound of body weight as a target for your protein. I think that is a great target for people to use kind of as a heuristic. And what we're finding that for a lot of people, that's challenging,
Yeah.
but also if you're dialing in other aspects, it's unnecessary. And so, first of all, personally, pretty pro protein. I feel like if you hear me talk or you see the way that I eat, like I'm always making sure to get as enough or more than I need of protein. Because in my opinion, as long as your gut health and there's other things to account for, but it's really hard to kind of like eat too much protein as from a health perspective, because it really helps with there's so many other health effects from a metabolic health perspective that protein breaks down into amino acids, and you really want to get enough of all those amino acids for so many different functions in the body. And then for muscle preservation, and then just providing the building blocks of all kinds of hormones and other things in the body. So, but without kind of getting too far off into the weeds, I guess, if you have a more anabolic state that you're in, for example, if you're getting enough sleep and you're strength training regularly and your hormones are kind of on track, these things, and you're eating in a caloric surplus or you're eating at maintenance or above for calories, all of these things combined help create a more anabolic environment in the body. And when you have a more anabolic environment, it's more forgiving for you to actually eat less protein.
It makes sense.
And so versus if you are under eating, like if you're doing caloric restriction, or if you are not getting enough sleep, or if your hormones are off, or if you're not strength training, all of these things can contribute to a more catabolic environment in the body. And then it's much more critical for you to get enough or more protein to counteract that, basically.
Yeah.
So for the average person, like the heuristic, 1 gram per pound of body weight is great for men and women alike, and desired body weight. So if you're
Right.
wanting to gain, you would want to increase it a little from your current body weight. If you're wanting to lose, you would want to decrease it a little from your current body weight. But then again, if you are going through, let's say, a weight loss phase where you're eating a little bit less than your maintenance calories, you may actually want to increase your protein a little bit during that phase if you're really trying to prioritize holding on to every ounce of muscle, right? So, and then also protein is a source of calories too, but it tends to be a very like thermogenic source of calories. In a sense, it's not one-to-one in the body. Kind of protein and fiber are these two categories of macronutrients, so to speak, that have these other cascading effects beyond energy, right? Whereas carbs and fat and the ratio of those are kind of just more like energy management for most people, right?
Yeah.
And I'm taking out of the conversation in that like all the micronutrients and other things that are important from different types of food, right? But like you mentioned, doing a lower carb can be helpful for like people tend to prefer one or the other. Like either they have kind of a default state or their microbiome tends to push them in one direction or another. But at the end of the day, if you're getting enough energy and not too much energy, the ratio of carbs to fat is kind of personal. And if you tend to do a lot of like low and slow type of exercise, people tend to do better on like a higher fat, lower carb diet. And if you're doing a lot of like acute high intensity exercise, people tend to do a little bit better with a higher carb and lower fat energy balance. But again, it's individual as well. And you can actually train your body to go one way or the other as well. So
Right.
a lot of
Yeah.
factors.
No, you're totally right. Yeah, and it's like, well, where are you today? What do what are you aiming at? It fluctuates so tremendously. What does your lifestyle allow for? Again, the hormone thing is massive because if your hormones are way off, or if you're hyper or hypothyroid, like that's you gotta face that stuff as well because it adds to the greater picture. But where'd you get the name Spren?
It's inspired by my favorite author, Brandon Sanderson. And so a bunch of us on the team are sci-fi fantasy nerds. He writes this, I think he's one of the greatest authors of all time personally. But in any case, it inspired in us sort of like two things. One is a companion for your journey, and the other is this embodiment of the human experience. So it's kind of like everything that you experience, kind of, we help you view that and understand it.
I like it. I like it. I wasn't sure if it was one of those where it's like we need to pick a word that doesn't mean anything but sound is easy to say.
It serves that purpose too. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a five-letter.com that, could be taken in any direction,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah. Yeah. When you're building stuff like this, and this is, Elite HRV and now Spren, walk me through the editing process because I'm sure a lot of developers for technology like this are like, ooh, let's add this, ooh, let's add that, ooh, let's tie this into the blood work, ooh, let's tie this into the genetic test, ooh, let's do recipes, and it can get a little bit. I think for the user, oftentimes it's like this is too much shit. Like there's 17 different other plugins, and I can hook it up with my Aura, and I think I maybe speaking for myself. I think that my audience and myself are like, at the more techie end of performance optimization and biohacking. I'm sure you saw the red lights I had on my shoulder and the Aura ring on my finger. So like I think we're a little on the higher end of the tech awareness and usability. But one thing that I like is the kind of the simplicity of this, of the experience, and it's like, what are your goals? What can we help you with? So how do you keep from just throwing the kitchen sink and having 1,000 plugins to 1,000 different things all through this app? And or is that the plan?
Yeah, well, so I fit right into that category of people that eventually want to do everything and solve every problem.
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
you know, the list of ideas never gets shorter, so to speak. But when delivering the experience, I think that is actually one of the hardest things to do is to simplify it all down, right? Because at the end of the day, somebody's health and longevity or performance journey is a very complex, multifaceted journey. And right now, today, whoever's listening to this probably would already be experiencing this. You're probably piecing together a bunch of different products and services. You're piecing together information from a bunch of different sources, and you're trying to put all these things together, maybe even running spreadsheets still in 2025 on some things, right? And so, but over time, we want to contribute to making this easier for people to just collect the data they need, but not the data they don't need, right? Like this is one of the core principles that we operate from is everyone doesn't have to track everything all the time, right? And, as things get easier to track, like I believe that the whole industry is moving towards making it easier to track, making it cheaper to track, making it more passive, right? So that you don't even have to think about it. Some things will just be tracked for you. And in those cases, especially with the compounding effects we're seeing with AI explosion and all that type of stuff, maybe someday there will be narrative that's like, yes, everyone should track everything all the time because why not? It's like not costing you anything, even not costing your attention, right?
Yeah.
But until we get there, we try to help people understand like, look, what are your goals? Where are you at right now? Let's form a kind of as much of a comprehensive picture of you as we can up front. And then help you understand like, okay, when you're going on this journey of, let's say, optimizing your body composition, here are the couple big movers that if you're not getting these right, then you don't even need to worry about all this other stuff,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And once you get those right, then you can add on all the other stuff too. It's there. You can just double click down into it, so to speak. Like HRV, for example, coming full circle on our journey. You know, we started with HRV, we ended up in body composition. A lot of people think of body composition as an outcome that they're working towards, right? Like I want to lose body fat, or I want to build muscle, or I want to recomposition for longevity or performance reasons. Along that journey, understanding how your body's recovery and capacity works through HRV can be very helpful, but it may not be the first place that you start, right? Because if
Yeah.
your nutrition isn't dialed and you're just not getting enough sleep and you're never strength training, then those three things alone will really be the 90-10, so to speak, for body composition. And then from there, you can optimize further. And so that's kind of how we think about it. Try to like take the big complex life journey and break it down into smaller chunks and allow you to focus and simplify the experience around those.
Yeah. And as I click through while we're talking together, it shows that you can order the at home biomarker test, which I think everybody should do at least once a year. And if you're a biohacker, or you've got big goals, or you should probably do it, every 6 months, maybe even every quarter, to kind of see how you're trending. So I like to see that. But I'm looking at all these additional, connect data, link with Apple Health, readiness score. I think for me, who has tinkered around with so many different things, I think that just the fact that you know exactly what your body fat is, you know what your BMI is, you have those other markers that explain that we've already covered. And then it's like, well, how do you want to eat? Like, what are your goals, and what's the nutrition that you can implement on the path to those goals? And it just makes it simple, because I think simple is hard to do. Simple and elegant is tough because you have to edit things down so much.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about, because I'm on the Set Up Your Coach. Your membership includes 24/7 AI coach access with exercise plans, personal nutrition guidance, and accountability. I'm sort of this guy who, and I may be alone in this, that I don't really trust AI.
Mm-hmm.
I use it occasionally. I use it maybe twice a week. Obviously, I know lots of people who are using it all day, every day. I've heard
Yep.
NPR stories of people going on dates with AI and
Yep.
having AI therapists, which freak me the fuck out. We've all seen Terminator. We know how this ends. However, talk me through, maybe sell me, you don't have to, sell me on why a 24/7 AI coach might be a good idea for me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it comes with the robot that can sleep in your bed with you. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, I've seen her also, like, come on.
It's so okay. So this is, yeah, it's an interesting topic because I think it's something that the entire like geopolitical, social, cultural landscape is trying to wrestle with right now,
Yeah.
right? And so I'm a believer that relationships with other humans are one of the most important things in life, basically, right? So a lot of our purpose and our meaning and a lot of our decisions, and even the decisions we make for our health and longevity and other performance decisions, come from who we spend time with, whether we trust those people, what types of exchanges we have with those people, etc. Right? So for me, AI, but I am a tech optimist generally, and also an AI optimist generally. So I understand there's a lot of potential scary things about it that I think we should take very seriously, but I think there's a lot of exciting things about it too. So I promise I'll get to actually answering your question, but I think this is a really interesting subject because when we look at the AI coach, one of the things that it can really do is help somebody answer little questions here and there with the context of their data. right?
Yeah.
So it's like, look, that's like, okay, I listen to this podcast, I'm excited, I start tracking my body composition, and then I remember that they said Android-Gynoid fat, is this thing that it's a kind of important, and mine just changed from 1.2 to 1.1. Is that good or bad? I can't really remember, right? The AI coach can actually just answer that question for you really quickly. And you could go look that up. You could go find your own answers to that and plug in your information and maybe screenshot the app and plug it in somewhere. But we're just trying to make it easier and more simple, where it's saying like this AI coach can actually see your data. We keep it very private. So this is all built within a secure environment. It's not like transmitting your data all over the place and sharing it with third parties and all that type of
That's
stuff.
important to note. I appreciate that.
Yeah, yeah. But we're trying to break down the barriers and just make it easy to where you don't have to, again, piece together a bunch of different tools. So a couple of examples of what people use it for on Spren's AI coach, is asking questions about your data. Like, what does this mean? What does that mean? What are the reference ranges, et cetera, et cetera. And then getting reminders. So the whole like reminders and accountability thing. An AI is very unlikely to be as good as a human at providing accountability, right? Like if I say, hey friend, I'm going to, eat healthy this week. And then your friend at the end of the week is like, so did you do it? And you're like, no. Yeah. You feel an emotional connection to that. But if an AI is like, hey, did you do it? You're like, nope. And you don't,
Nope. Yeah.
it's like, who cares what the AI thinks, right? So it's not accountability necessarily at that same emotional relationship level, but helping you hold yourself accountable is really a better way of framing it.
Well done. Yeah.
So it's like saying, okay, I'm going to work out 3 times this week. What days? Right? So instead of just saying, I'm going to work out 3 days this week, which days are we going to do
Yeah.
it? Right?
Which is different from ChatGPT that will say, you're the best. Of course you're gonna work out 3 days this week. Based on what I know about you, you're a very committed person and I'm sure that you're gonna do it.
Yeah,
Different.
you're going to kill it. It's going to be great.
Yeah.
And then similarly, like again, no one's perfect. Let's say, so on the front end, it'll ask me things like which days. And then if you're like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, then it'll be like, okay, do you want me to remind you on Sunday night, Tuesday night, and Thursday night to put your workout clothes out so that that's like a really well-known thing that coaches will use, is to say like, put your workout clothes out the night before, because just seeing them there, and that takes one less thing off your plate when you're trying to think through doing it on the day of. You're just more likely to follow through if you've already taken a couple of steps, right? Plus the reminder cue, etc. Or you can have it text you in the morning and say, hey, remember you're planning for your workout today. I saw that you had a little bit less than average sleep last night. Hydrating with some electrolytes could really help keep your energy up at the gym today. Right. And so it's helpful, it's proactive, it's just doing little things really, that if you're an optimizer, you may even know some of these things. For me, I've just spent so long, over a decade, trying to optimize all these things. I could talk endlessly about ways to optimize your energy for a workout. But having somebody else think about it, in this case, an automated system, and just give me those little nudges helps even me just kind of take that off my plate. But again, you can kind of see how that doesn't replace a coach or the need for relationships with a practitioner or a guide on the whole journey. I'm a big fan. So I was a coach, and I've always worked since I became one. I've always had my own as well. So I work with a coach, I work with a practitioner. Highly recommend anyone that can afford to do that should, because that's how you get real results, really. And the tricky part is that there's no economic way to scale human to human coaching. Really great coaches are kind of overloaded with demand, and you can't be on call 24/7, but the journey is 24/7.
Yeah.
So somebody's on the journey 24/7, they run into issues like 10 times a day. They can't just call you 10 times a day. And
Yeah.
so we're trying to augment and have systems that help people get the answers to the questions they're looking for. But also we partner with coaches and allow them to control what the system does.
They provide input for the types of prompts or wording or what sorts of things to inform the AI to do.
Yep. Yeah. So, like, as an example, again, nutrition, some coaches may be more plant-based, others may be more animal-based. And I have personal opinions about that, but my philosophy as a platform provider is that we should let the coaches and the practitioners play that story out the way they want to play it out within the bounds of safety, right? So, like, if somebody, I know, like, fasting is a good example, right? Fasting is something that in the mainstream, people might look at things that you've done on this channel and be like, oh my gosh, that's crazy or something, right? I happen to know from self-experimentation and from just looking at it is that if you're careful about these things, you can actually do pretty extreme fasts without a lot of risk and a lot of discomfort maybe, but not a lot of risk. But if somebody was to prescribe like, just don't eat for 3 months, as an extreme, silly example, you're going to definitely lose weight on that plan, but, you're going to end up in the hospital also. So we wouldn't let the system recommend that.
Yeah. Yeah, you're not going to have the AI do what I've done and what I'm, 5 day no food, no water, dry fasting is not. Don't put that. Do not put that in the AI, Jason. I'm telling you now, Instagram's going to go. You have an eating disorder. We're taking down this post. You can't talk about this stuff on the internet, which is something I've experienced recently. I'll spare you the pitch on dry fasting, although you should do it. What would be interesting is in my last 5 day dry fast, I did blood work the day before and the day after, and the data was phenomenal. My testosterone went up like 200 points.
Wow.
My inflammation markers were the same. My mineral markers were about the same, just a slight difference there, but super interesting. What would be really interesting is as we're talking, I'm multitasking. I just hooked up my Aura Ring to the app, so
Yeah.
just so I can get that data. But it would be super interesting to take a before and after picture, like I have, and see like, well, based on
Yep.
7 to 169, which is lower than I thought. How much does Spren think I fluctuated?
Right.
Did I lose 3% body fat? Did I lose 7% body fat in 5 days? Obviously there's dehydration and stuff. The most weight you can actually lose in water weight is 10 pounds. So of that 18 that I lost, 10 of it was water. What's the other 8? Is it senescent cells or, body fat, etc.? But I think the potential and application for this app that you've built is phenomenal. And again, for a guy who's the biohacker who's never done an InBody or a DEXA, to have this and be like, whoa, that's pretty cool to be able to check that out. One burning question, and we're going to land this plane here in just a second. What is the margin of error, do you think, in that body fat percentage total?
Yeah, so we can give you a very specific answer. It's 2.67%.
2.67%.
Yeah, that's the mean absolute error. And then the median is 1.9%. And so basically what that means is that for a large number of people, it's within like 1% or so. And I can't remember the exact standard deviation thresholds, but for multiple standard deviations, it's essentially within the margin of error of DEXA itself. And
Wow.
so we did this study that we just announced where it was done by the Pennington Biomedical Research Lab at LSU. So not by us necessarily, but we provided the tools, obviously. And so they put 3 DEXA machines side by side, and we were within the margin of error of those 3 machines compared to each other.
Fascinating.
So that's about as good as you could get, essentially. And the other types of hardware that are on the market are actually worse than that if you're using DEXA as the benchmark. The 2 that you can maybe get better than that with are MRI or autopsy.
Dark.
But in any case, with DEXA as kind of the gold standard benchmark in this case, highly accurate, highly reliable, And again, coming back to what you said earlier, there is a bit of a contract that we are an agreement that we ask our community to go on with us, which is that you follow the directions. Basically, if you are wearing loose clothing, or you're in a dark room, or you have like multiple people in the frame, these things can throw it off. But we're getting better and better. To be honest, we want to make it to where you don't have to think about all that stuff. Over time, we want to make it as brainless as possible, and it's getting better and better. Even being able to check now for things like clothing in our latest release.
How do you do that? Man, that's how. I mean, if you're wearing spandex, maybe, but if you're wearing a friggin' fluffy, puffy shirt, obviously it's gonna throw that. If you can't get organized enough to be alone in a well lit room in your underwear to take the picture, then what are you doing anyway? Like, how committed to this are you? Come on.
Yeah, to be fair to people is that our instructions have gotten better as we've learned too. So like, I will say that like a lot of people like to take it in their bedroom, right? Which is totally fine. It's a great place to do it. Obviously, a private place to do it, right? But then in the background, there can be just like all sorts of chaos, right? And so when we do things like surveys, like, because we'll say like, oh, there's like certain groups of people that struggle to get a good scan, and we do surveys and we try to interview people and talk to them, and we're like, oh, can you even just show us like where are you doing this, right?
Yeah.
And they'll be like, yeah, right here. Here's my bedroom. And you're like, oh, okay. So there's like piles of laundry, and there's a
There's a
bunch
Jackson Pollock behind you. Come
of
on.
yeah, yeah, exactly. They've got the Arnold poster on the wall, right?
Yeah.
And so again, getting better at detecting all that stuff more automatically so you don't have to worry about it, but also just providing better instructions and letting people know, and it's totally fine. The other thing is if you mess up, just delete your scan and do it again, right? So that's the beauty of like making this stuff so accessible. And one thing that we learned even 10 years ago, putting HRV, we used to say we brought HRV out of the lab, is kind of how we used to talk about it. Because again, same, trying to get really accurate, high quality, reliable data, but in consumer friendly packages. But basically, following the instructions and making it easier and easier for people opens all these new use cases. So that's kind of where I was going with that, is we had no idea what people were going to do once they could measure these things like anytime, anywhere, right?
Yeah.
And so some people are measuring body composition now every day. And I don't think you need to do that personally. You can measure your body weight every day, but even that isn't really that useful. Like if you kind of average the week of your body weight out, then the weekly average of your body weight is more useful generally. The day-to-day is good for seeing things like water weight fluctuations, to your point earlier, if you're really curious about water weight fluctuations. But now a lot of people measure body composition once a week. They'll set it up like a reminder to do it every Saturday morning or every Sunday morning or something like that, but it could be any day of the week. And it's best if you do it in the morning, kind of as a consistent routine, because it can, like the water, we're getting better and better. And that's the other thing about software solutions. Sorry, I'm going on a lot of different
No, you're good.
rabbit holes here, but some of the major innovations with like the iPhone and Tesla, for example, those companies were like, hey, we tried to remove all the because then we could really iterate on the experience without having to put new hardware out. Right. And so what's interesting about us being on the phone, we can actually enhance the accuracy and the reliability over time as we continuously innovate and build more and get smarter. And it just gets better and better, and you don't have to do anything. It's just better. Versus hardware-based solutions have to put out new hardware often. And so it's a multi-$1,000 purchase for some organizations. If you're buying a DEXA, it's anywhere from $50,000 to $250,000 if you get an old one or a new one, basically. And in any case, people are now doing this and measuring all kinds of crazy stuff, and then they're sending us emails saying, look what I learned when I did this fast, or look what I learned when I did this, different dietary protocol or exercise regimen or hormone regulation, hormone therapy. Speaking of, get so many emails of people who are trying out GLP-1s. And one example was a guy who was losing a lot of weight and was very happy with that until he started measuring with Spren and realizing he was losing all his muscle.
Right.
and then went to a doctor because at first he was skeptical, like he didn't want to believe it. Like I wouldn't either. Went to a doctor, got it validated, and the doctor was like, you should definitely keep using Spren, but also you should, do these things like strength training, protein, like make sure that your hormones and your sleep are in the right place. And he completely stopped losing muscle from that point forward. He followed our nutrition plan. He actually stayed on the medications because he had a lot of weight to lose, but he completely preserved his muscle from that point
Wow.
forward.
Dude, that in and of itself is a meaningful enough use case that that could change a lot of people's lives, because there's so many people who are on GLP-1s, people near and dear to my life, who, as many times as I tell them, like, you have to do body weight squats at a minimum. You got to hammer protein even though you're not hungry. It's really, really important so that you keep your brain and keep your heart intact. You're just going to lose fat and muscle, and you're just going to be melted candle wax, and it's going to be a problem for you. I could say that 17 times to people that I absolutely love, and they're like, "Meh, okay." But if they use Spren and it's like, in the last month you've lost a ton of muscle mass, you've lost, and maybe that's more of the weight that you're losing is in muscle mass, and you're turning into candle wax. That's freaking scary, man.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can, yeah, no, I think that's a big one. For there's not a lot of people in listening right now who are on GLP-1s, probably not a single person, but
They probably know a lot of people though.
they know they've got people that they love that are doing it and aren't listening to them either, who are maybe data driven, who want to see what their composition is. Dude, I think you've created something really, really spectacular. I am familiar with Elite HRV. I've never used it, but I was familiar with it. But I think that this is spectacular. What a cool platform. Again, as you're talking, because I just opened the box this morning and took a picture of myself in my underwear to kind of get the ball rolling, like clicking through the app as you're talking to see like all these other things. I just